Hey, everybody, welcome to this week's episode of the Lumber Word, episode 136. We have a
Oh, shoot.
returning guest, Brian Westbury from First Trust. Brian is the head economist of First Trust. He's traveling on the road right now. Where are you at, Brian?
I'm in Portland, Oregon,
Oh,
home
right
of
on.
yeah, tree country, lumber country.
I
There
love
you
it.
go. Yeah.
I love it.
Mhm,
Well,
mhm.
I saw you yesterday on Charles Payne, so I'll probably ask you some of those questions also that you went over with him.
Yep.
Uh,
He was
Greg-
on. He was on. Brian was on the Big Money Show on Fox Business last week, and I was like watching him, going, "Oh man, this is a bummer." The whole show got hijacked by Zelensky and Trump's meeting.
Oh, wow.
I was like,
Exactly.
Wow. He's like,
Yeah.
he's in the studio for an hour, and the whole hour they're talking about that.
And I flew to New York City for that. Like it was, anyway. So had a
Greg,
good
why
time
don't
in New York. Yep.
Why don't we jump into the quick lumber update and then we'll roll right into Brian. It'll be a perfect segue into it.
Okay. You want me to start, or you want to start?
Let's just start about what you were talking about this morning when I was in your office.
You mean that
about the lumber?
I mean, about that. Okay, yeah. Okay,
Yeah.
and not that other thing we were talking about.
Exactly.
Like, yeah. I mean, the lumber market's in absolute complete disarray. I mean, we're in a free fall mode. I think the anticipation of higher duties and 232 and poo this, that. I mean, I think the market had a big rally and there was anticipation of a lot more. And now the market's incredibly disappointed that, things aren't better. We're in an oversupplied situation, which means, prices fall in a vacuum, and that's where we are. They're falling in a vacuum right here.
Yeah, Greg, as I think Brian's trying to sign back in here, but one of the interesting things when we looked at this, we've sold off. How much have we sold off in the last 30 days on the futures? And then we'll talk about cash.
Well, futures is down currently $130 from 10, 12 days ago.
Mm-hmm. And cash really, as far as a print wise, has really started correcting in the last 2 weeks. But arguably, long seem to be in a panic at this point. And that means either the market's clearing or starting to clear. I think we're probably in that last 8th, 9th inning of this move.
Yeah, well, I mean, one of the situations that you have is in the spruce market, at least, you've got a number of producers that aren't really participating in the cash market every day. They've been, while they pushed all the wood they could out the door prior to increases in CVD and AD, for 3 weeks now, at least they've been building inventory back up. So, that's all going to have to clear at some point. I mean, we had lots of conversation. I mean, you look at southern yellow pine prices, and the FOB mill price right now is basically stumpage cost. So, I mean, the run forward losses on lumber producers are fairly significant right here.
So do you think with Carney coming out last week and saying he was going to help support the mills, and then coming out and basically saying that the U.S. has given us, we have the best deals going on, that puts some pressure on the market also in lumber?
Well, maybe. I mean, well, the bigger issue is what, we want to really bring Brian in.
Yeah.
And talk about.
Yeah, well, which is perfect because, a lot of people on X and other in LinkedIn are saying, is lumber the canary in the coal mine? And I think if you look at all the other species besides Canadian spruce, they all rolled over pretty much second quarter of this year. And spruce pretty much has been running due to tariff related conversations and issues. And it's pretty much given all that premium back in the last 30 days. So, yeah, this is a perfect time to bring Brian in to talk a little bit about what's the current economy, Brian? What are you seeing?
Yeah, well, let me just add a couple things about housing. And I'd love to hear your guys' thoughts, because I look at we all look at existing home sales, new home sales, housing starts. I look at all these charts, and if you look at these charts, housing today is no higher than it was in 2018, 2019. I mean, in other words, we've been flat. Like, I know it's been up and down, and COVID, did crazy things and all of that, but basically we're flat from 5 years ago. We have more population in this country. It kind of blows my mind. And I know we were overbuilding in '08, but we were not overbuilding in 18, 19, and we're still flat. And that, uh, I mean, that has to have an impact on prices. I know cost of construction has gone up and all of those things, but the demand for lumber, it's got to be kind of flat from. I I don't follow that market as well as you guys, but I just look at housing overall, and that just blows my mind.
When
It's
you
flat for 5 years.
Right. And I mean, when you look at housing today, I mean, one of the biggest issue is affordability. I
Hmm.
mean, we had back-to-back years of home prices increasing
Yep.
20%. And, while you and I had a conversation the other day, there's some higher beta markets, Florida, being one that we were talking about, that they're seeing some price
Hmm.
correction. Chase Schiller came out yesterday, and it was, I think it was the slowest increase in the last 2 years of like
Right.
1.2%. And that's probably the best. That's probably the best gauge of what the real prices are, because it's apples and
Right.
apples, not apples and
Yep.
oranges. Um, but yeah, housing is punk here, and I have a hard time, and maybe this lends itself to talk a little bit about interest rates. Um, Big national builders have been buying down mortgages for buyers for the last 12 to 24
Yep.
months. Depending on your community that you're in there at, 4.25%, 4%, maybe even some sub four stuff, which they're doing that to keep product
Right.
moving. Mortgage rates are now what, 6.5, I
Yep.
think. Is that
Yep.
right?
30 year. Yeah.
So, Brian, Ashley was asking me about this before. Is so what the Fed does on Fed funds rate, what impact does that have on long-term
Yeah.
rates, 10-year treasury and mortgage
I
rates?
think I think this is a really, I mean, obviously we got to go there, but let me just make one comment. Let me make one comment about affordability that I don't think a lot of people focus on, and this is true worldwide. Houses are unaffordable. Cars, like, people are now using 7-year, 8-year financings to buy cars. So what in the world is going on? Because the price of automobiles, the price of houses, it's I get it, there's inflation, but your wages go up too, and GDP goes up too, everything goes up, and houses are way more expensive today than they were in 1930, but they were in 1950, they were more expensive than in 1930, and yet people can still afford them. And so, why can't people afford houses? And my argument is it's because government is too big. If you take federal, state, and local government spending, because that's what matters, spending, not the taxes, the spending, and then you add in the cost of complying with regulation. So, it costs all of us money to do our taxes every year, and time, plus all the regulations on building, which we know about, all that stuff. It adds up to 51% of our output. So 51% of all of our GDP, which is really our income, it goes to the government. They either tax it from us or they borrow it from us. And then the
What was that like 20, 30, 40 years ago? What was
oh
that
gosh, in
percentage?
in 1930, that's 100 years ago, the federal government was 2.5%, and state and local governments were about 1.5%. I mean, we were talking 5%. And so
What was it in the
in
80s? What was it in the
and when Ronald Reagan came into office, it was 17 was the feds, probably 15 was state and local, so that'd make it 32. It was like under 40%. So what really caused this to jump was first '08 TARP and all, and then Obama's shovel ready project bill, and then COVID. And so we went from non-defense federal spending 15%, it's now 21%. They take 6% more. And if you look at actually the price of homes as a factor relative to incomes. You used to be able to buy homes were 3 times income. Now they're 5, 6, 7 times average income, and I would argue that the reason is the government is your unaffordable house is building a windmill. In other words, the government's taxing and borrowing from us in order to build windmills. And
So I saw that we canceled a $6.5 billion windmill project today.
awesome.
I mean, so the current administration is taking a hatchet to a massive amount of these programs and things that have been prior committed, and they're either stopping them, clawing them back. It was interesting when we listened. There's no economic basis for the windmills.
Right.
90% of the money that is generated is government subsidy.
Mm-hmm.
So, I mean, when you have private companies that are building, small nuclear on their own dime, that seems to be a much better option. But the current government is working really, really hard to reverse what you're talking about. What do you think the timeline is for that? Ashley and I had this conversation about, the Department of Ag, right? They're closing down all of the offices in Washington, D.C. and moving everything out into their
Salt
field
Lake
offices.
City and Omaha and Denver. Yeah, it's awesome.
Des Moines. Yeah.
So will that I mean, let's just tie that into housing. Will that hurt the DC housing market? I heard, Greg, you were talking to somebody this morning that has places in DC they ship to, and their question was, what happens to the DC market, which has just been blowing and going for because that's
I think bloated.
That's where all the I mean, look where the money's concentrated. So who benefits from that money leaving? What areas? Like Salt Lake City?
I think it's the same places that it's Florida, Texas, Tennessee, Utah has been booming. Idaho, we're Montana. People are moving to Montana, believe it or not. And
that's a Frank Zappa song. Moving to Montana.
Yeah, I need a
dental floss.
I remember that. Can you hear me? Am I coming through?
Yeah, we hear you, Matt. Brian's just down the street from you.
Yeah,
I'm in Portland.
I had technical difficulties. You are? No way.
Yeah. We have a meeting today at the Ritz. Lunch. You want to come over for lunch? Come on over.
Nice.
But Brian, when
I think I will.
Will this titanic shift away from bigger government and more private sector, less government? I mean, if you're saying it's plus 50% now, and in the 1980s it was sub 40%. I mean, if you move that needle 5 or 10%, what does that mean? What does that mean for the economy, and what does that mean for everybody?
Every penny that the government doesn't take is a penny that we keep in the private sector. So all of that helps. I think to get back to the 80s, I don't know if the crew in Washington right now can do it. I'm not saying Trump doesn't want to do it, or his people aren't trying as hard as they can, but Congress is the one that really has to vote for this, and they never vote to cut spending. So I mean, Reagan was the only one that was able to really slow it down. I will tell you, to go back to Ashley's question about DC, the total number of furloughed and laid off government employees right now, and the furloughs are about to run out September and October, is 300,000. So that's, and then you add in shipping workers to Des Moines and Salt Lake City from the ag department. I mean, now you're, talking 305, 310,000 people, and that'll have an impact on that market. And it's about time, because every time that city, I worked there in 1995 and 96. So Gingrich was Speaker of the House. People were terrified. Their house prices are going to go down, et cetera, et cetera. And you go back today, and the place is twice as big. And it's like so much money goes through Washington D.C. It's insanity. But anyway, to go back to this,
You were there the last time the government actually had a balanced budget,
yeah.
weren't you? You were there during the contract with
That's
America
exactly right. And we shut down,
last
yeah,
time.
because we
Yep.
shut down the government, and we were willing to, and it worked. And these guys won't do it anymore. But just to go back to this, I swear this is one of the reasons, cars you go to Europe, every time I go to Europe, cars just keep getting smaller and smaller and smaller. And they convince
Yep.
themselves that they're living a small footprint life, and saving the world, but really they can't afford a big car. And the same is true with housing
The
here.
streets are really narrow
Yeah,
too.
well, that is true.
Yeah.
But it's also that they can't afford a big car, and they can't afford a big house,
Yeah.
and they can't afford a big RV, and that's coming to America. And I think we're kind of in that process right now, and we have to cut the size of government to fix this in the long term. I wish it would fix it tomorrow or next month or next year, but it's going to take a long time. Uh, I mean, it took 20 years, 80s and 90s, Reagan and Clinton, and then we had a booming economy, and uh and in everything. And
If
then
you if you project forward, the current trajectory of what the current administration is doing, and if they're able to maintain that momentum and continue to do that, I mean, I guess that would really show up. What, 5, 8, 10 years from now is when ultimately the biggest benefit of a smaller, less intrusive government, and getting back to more personal liberty, that's when it's really going to ultimately show. But I wanted to switch gears real quick on one thing and talk about
yeah,
immigration, and because it was something that Powell said at Jackson Hole last week about how the employment is in a kind of I guess a funky place, in that the employment growth is very slow, but the supply is not growing as a result of the X millions less
right.
immigrants that are here, do one reason or another. Fast forward over the next 12 to 24 months, what does that mean for the economy? Because you and I have had this discussion about like how the economy
Yeah.
grows,
Yep.
right? Two ways.
Yeah, productivity and labor force growth. And uh, there's immigration is one factor, but the other factor is that we pay people not to work. I mean, COVID was the perfect example, and a lot of that is carried on. So they just put a work rule into Medicaid. They watered it down, but that's really important. And I think,
That's
yeah,
draconian, Brian. That's draconian.
yes, it's going to kill people. Yeah.
Making able-bodied
Mhm.
men have to work. What? Come
Yeah.
on, come on.
And I think they need to go further and put it into welfare. That's what Clinton did, and we can get
Yep.
growth in labor force out of that. Because right now we're kind of and then I also think we're going to end up um, relaxing the legal immigration into America. We want people that want to go through the steps to get here and assimilate and not get free stuff when they get here. And I think if we can figure that over the next couple of years, we'll have our labor force growth. Matt,
Couple
Yeah,
questions.
I'm gonna make a big projection right now. Is that that Trump is going to ultimately do like what Reagan did, which was the last time we had any immigration reform, and he's going to give dreamers citizenship, and build a pathway for people that are here, and like productive parts of society to be able to become
Right.
citizens. And I don't know if he's going to do it before the midterms or after.
Mhm.
That's my only question. But I think, it's like a Nixon opening up China type of a thing. He's the one that can
Right.
do it.
I got a
Yep,
couple
that
questions
is
for you,
it's a
Brian.
really good point. Yeah, Matt.
One is, what are your thoughts on the government taking a stake in Intel? And that's an interesting discussion in and of itself. But then the other one is, what do you think the rate cut, if there is going to be one here in September? I don't know if you guys talked about this while I was rebooting my computer, but
Not yet. No.
what do you think of those two things? What are your thoughts?
Hey Matt,
Yeah.
Brian, before I heard you on Charles's show yesterday, Paynes, you said and this will add to what I'll fold this into Matt's question. 2020, you said the Federal Reserve said for the previous 10 years inflation was at 1.5%,
Yep.
and they felt that their goal was to keep it at 2% going
Mhm.
forward. You think it should be at 0, right? And
Yeah.
so, yeah, to Matt's question, where are we going on rates and what's happening here?
Yeah. So I read a piece, I think it was by Jeffrey Carter on Substack. If anybody's on Substack, I forget how much he charges, $5 a month or something. But Jeffrey's really good, former trader, et cetera, et cetera. Good guy. He wrote a piece the other day, Good Trump, Bad Trump, Good Trump, Bad Trump, Good Trump, something like that was the title. And good Trump is shutting down the border. Bad Trump is taking a 10% stake in Intel. Like I don't get that. The government should. I fully understand that if we give them money, maybe we should get a stake, but we shouldn't be giving them money in the first place. And certainly, I don't think the government should have a stake in this. Now they're talking about defense companies and pharmaceutical companies. This is the road to serfdom, as
Right.
Hayek would say, and so I totally disagree with it. I wish they weren't doing it.
Just like as like a thought through on that. Defense contractors, pharmaceutical companies, depending on the company, they get somewhere between 80 and 90% of their total
Mhm.
revenue comes from the U.S.
Yep.
government. So, so they're basically they work for the U.S.
Right.
government. That from a practical standpoint, what's the difference between like them getting 80 or 90% of the revenue from the government versus the government having some stake in that also? What I mean?
What I'd rather do is beat them up on price, and
Right.
and get good government deals. I mean, I guess you could take a stake and then take some of the profit on the other end, but that's the same thing, right? So if you got 90% of your revenue coming from the government, well, you should be a not for profit because you're
Yeah.
not, you're like,
There you go.
So I have never understood how we government's too big. It shows up in everything we talk about, and so just a step forward on this. I'm going to take Ashley's kind of comment about the 1.5% inflation, then go into what's going on with rates. The Fed in 2020, so this was at Jackson Hole. Powell gave a speech, and the Fed was doing. Many members were giving this talk that they wanted inflation to average 2% over time. And here's the reason, because in the previous 10 years from 2010 to 2020, inflation was only 1.5%. Now, if I was the head of the Fed, I would be like, Rocky on the steps of the museum in Philadelphia. I'm like, victory, under 2% inflation, we win. They actually looked at it as a negative because they call it
Mm.
the great moderation. After the '08 crisis, growth wasn't that rapid and unemployment didn't come down. And they actually believed that only having 1.5% inflation was a sign that they were too tight. And that's why the economy wasn't growing fast. Actually, it wasn't growing.
What did money supply grow during
Like
those 12 years?
6% a year.
It was
Yeah,
flat.
it's flat. 6% a year, didn't hardly change. It was up some, but it didn't accelerate. We went up and down. But
and interest rates were basically
Zero.
almost
Yeah,
zero,
yeah,
right?
yeah, for 7 years
So
during that period. And but here's the point I want to make about this. At the time, I wrote, what does this mean? So if you wanted to average 2%, then are you going to have 2.5 for the next 10 years? And then 2.5 plus 1.5 divided by 2 is 2? Are you going to have 5% inflation for the next 5 years? Are you going to have 6% inflation for the next three? I mean, however, all the averages work out. Nobody knew what they meant. Like you couldn't.
well, but they succeeded because they got 9%
Yes, they
inflation.
did. They fixed it right away.
Yeah.
They fixed it in like 1
Yes,
year.
they did. And I always thought this was the craziest policy ever. And so last week at Jackson Hole, he backed off of this. He goes, "Oh, we're not doing that anymore." Well, of course you shouldn't, like you dummies. And so 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 that was one thing. Now, here's the deal. Inflation today, the way I look at it, there's 30 measures of inflation. It's about 2.5%. And I think real rates above inflation, let's call it 1.5. Maybe it's one. All right, for a T-bill. Um, that's 3.5 to 4. So the Fed has room to cut, and they
Right.
should cut. And Powell last week, he made all the excuses to cut. They're going to cut in September, no doubt about it. And so I expect a quarter, but they should be because interest rates are too
What
high.
will the 10-year do when they cut? 10 years 4.25 right
Here's
now.
here's the problem, and that is people are really worried. I I believe Trump should go after Lisa Cook. If she lied about mortgages, she should be gone. She needs to prove that she didn't lie. But but it's not the point about whether he can or cannot fire her. If she lied about that, I'm sick and tired of this. I mean, we had a Treasury Secretary who didn't pay his taxes. Like the Democrats somehow, it's like, oh, it's okay if you break the law, and you can serve in government. That's just a
Yeah.
bunch of hogwash.
Yeah.
And these people need to be gone. It's a grifting place. It's corrupt,
Right.
and I'm perfectly fine. It has nothing to do with Fed independence. However, I do believe that Trump wants control. Trump said the other day he wants rates 3 percentage points lower, which means he wants
Yeah.
a 1.5% short-term rate. And that's lower than inflation. So as an economist, I'm going, whoa, whoa, whoa. I get it. You're a builder. I get it. You like rates. But my belief is that if that were kind of looking like it might come true, I think long rates might go up. Like in that environment. And I
I,
don't know if it won't help anybody in the housing market.
I find, like all of the hand wringing and all the conversation about, the Fed needs to be independent, blah, 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 is like, no, the Fed doesn't need to be independent, but it needs to give the market the illusion that it's independent. Because it is not independent,
Right.
but the market needs to believe it, even if it's a lie.
Yeah.
Inflation is transitory, right? I mean,
Yep.
we need.
Yeah, exactly. Well,
You called
I
that
think-
one early, Greg. Yeah, you were right on top of that one when that was.
Yeah.
I remember you doubting that.
Brian, what's more important for the economy? The federal funds rate or the growth of the money supply?
The money supply, by far. We had the federal
because you can have like a federal funds rate that's below inflation, and if you starve the money supply, they're going to offset.
Yeah.
Absolutely. Yeah. Well, this is the great. If you read Powell's speech and all his speeches and all these, the Federal Reserve, I swear, thinks all you got to do is move the federal funds rate up or down a quarter or a half or whatever it is, and they can affect climate change and inequality and the unemployment rate and inflation and like everything. I don't know where they got that. They're like delusional, like that they think this, and they don't talk about the money supply. They don't talk about what they did with the banking system back in '08. the whole thing about Fed independence is mind blowing to me. And I could go back in history and we could talk about how unindependent the Fed has been. But let's just go back to '08. The Federal Reserve during the subprime stuff, they wouldn't support changing mark to market accounting. And so forget that's why we had the crisis, by the way, but that doesn't matter. And so what they did is they financed government spending by buying government bonds, which the last time I looked at, if you're going to buy my debt, we're not independent from each other. Like,
Right.
and then they did it again during COVID.
You're enabling my bad behavior.
Yes, exactly. If you're my
Right?
credit card company, I want to be independent of my credit card company.
We basically
Leave me alone.
we sold our debt to ourselves is what we did, right?
Yes,
rather than put it
exactly.
on the open market. We're like, hey, we'll just cut ourselves a deal and then just pretend like nothing happened.
Right, exactly. And
Right. I mean, at one point, the Fed, I don't know what the number is today, but at one point, the Fed they owned like 2/3 of all of mortgage-backed securities. And I don't know what that number is today, but I mean, that's why that spread collapsed on mortgages, because they were buying the stuff up. And that's why we have all these people with, sub 3% long-term mortgages.
I'm one
Hey,
of
Brian,
them.
how do you feel about the overall economy right now going forward? Like, let's say the next 6 months or so. Do you feel like we're in a rocky place or we're in a good place, or what are your general overview?
Yeah, I think we're in a rocky place. I think I call it. I guess the way I say it is the era of easy everything is over. Now, I know we were just talking about Trump and rate cutting and the money supply, and it could be that the Fed comes in and starts up that, but the deficit is lower this year, not a massive amount, mainly because we're paying so much in interest, but we're cutting government spending, we're cutting government jobs. That the era of easy government spending, we haven't cut the budget massively. But we've cut it at the margin, and that's over. We also have interest rates that are a little bit too high. The money supply for the last 3 years, I know it went down and then up, but if you look at 3 years, it's up only 1%. So I feel like when you slow the money supply that much, when you cut the size of deficit and you aren't hiring all these government workers and throwing money out the door, all these cities are in trouble. I mean, Chicago is in deep doo right now. It's amazing to me. New York isn't as in bad doo, if you will, but California is in trouble. So the era of easy everything right now is over, and I think we pay a price for that.
So, Brian,
But has the stock market not gotten that
Brian,
memo?
can I keep?
Because unless
Can
I'm
I
missing
keep?
something, we're like
Can I
at
keep
all-time highs.
YOLOing into stocks and cryptocurrencies without
Yeah,
doing
see,
any analysis?
yeah,
And
I'm very worried about
I mean,
this.
Ashley, every week, Ashley comes in with some new harebrained thing that, hey, I did this and it's up like this much. I go, sell
That's
it.
what's
Get rid of it.
because
Sell it.
you
Get rid of
only.
it. He goes, yeah, he's like, so and so told me I should buy calls on. Blah, 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 blah. I'm like, what is it? I don't know.
Well, the def.
But it's up. But it's double.
That's me. That's me YOLOing, Greg.
You only
They made a
you
movie
only
about that,
live
Ashley.
once.
It was called The Big Short.
Yeah.
Yeah. Yep. That's what people are doing. I mean, the S&P 500 right now is selling at market cap 3.2 times sales. The average over the last 20 years is 1.6. We are, if you take that at face value,
Double.
we're 100% overvalued. Like that's face value. Like I get it. Like we're not. I don't think we are that much overvalued. But by every metric I look at, stocks are overvalued. The only way this makes sense to me is there's a couple of ways. If the long-term rate comes down, like the 10-year rate comes down under 3%, in my models, that's an important component. That makes the market fairly valued. If you were to buy stocks today and interest rates don't change, let's say they stay flat for 3 years. If earnings go up 10% a year, stocks are then fairly valued. So So maybe people are looking into the future going, we're not going to have the slowdown that Matt and I were talking about, where earnings will keep growing at 10% a year. And they're like, well, they're worth this much, maybe not today, but they're going to be worth this much then. I've got a 7-year, a 10-year, a 20-year time horizon. I'm going to keep buying. And so, but I don't think we're going to see the market keep screaming like it has over the last 2.5 years.
I mean, along those same lines, if you're talking about the stock market being overvalued, wouldn't you say that the home inventory is overvalued? The existing home inventory specifically,
I
not necessarily the new home inventory, but the existing home inventory. Guys like me and Ashley and Greg and you, we all
Yep,
picked up an extra 20 to 40% of equity in the COVID years, right? And
yep,
through no great thought of ours, we're not that smart. We just got lucky. And
right.
so how does that unwind? I mean, are we going to see a break in home prices, or just is the market just going to come up to meet like kind of these new higher entry costs? I'm
Yeah,
kind of flummoxed by the whole thing, honestly.
yeah. It is. I it's the hardest time I've ever seen to forecast because we have all this tariff stuff going on. We have the Fed fight going on. We've got Trump doing all these things. We've got COVID messing up economic data and the 40% money supply increase. So here, I guess here's the way I would summarize my view on housing, and that is we printed 40% new money during COVID, and and that's a automatic 40%. The dollar dropped in purchasing value by 40%, which means house prices went up, land prices went up, everything went up by 40%. And then there's different supply and demand factors in each market, whether no matter what commodity we're talking about or what state or city we're talking about. So Naples went up 200%. And I would argue they're coming back down. But I would say somewhere between 20 and 40% of the home price increase that we all experienced in during COVID and around that time is permanent because it's a drop in the value of our dollar.
Right.
In other words, and that's the good news. If you owned assets in that period, you won because it
Hmm.
was the era of easy everything. And so I do think obviously house prices are not going to go up as much. The money supply's now been flat for 3 years. Greg just mentioned Case Shiller. It's up 1% over the past year. And so I think we're going to calm down in price increases, but there are certain markets for sure that are up more than that 20 to 40%, and they're probably going to pull back. I've been watching the Naples housing market. I'm thinking about getting something down there. And every day on Zillow, I get price reduction, price reduction, price reduction. I mean,
Right.
there's people that are retired that bought a place for 500 grand and and it went up to 1.5 million, and their property taxes and their HOAs are killing them,
Mm.
because everything.
You know what they say about Naples? You know what they say about Naples, Brian? It's like, Florida is where your parents go to retire, and Naples is where your grandparents go. The great thing about going down there is the guys like you and I, we go down there. We're like really
Yeah.
young down
Yeah.
there.
You're sprightly.
We're like we're like spring chickens. So I have one thing that I'm thinking about, and I guess the silver bullet on everything is, the promise of AI and what it's going to be able to do for productivity
Yeah.
in our economy. um, and also in the short to intermediate term, the offset of less government spending is more private sector. If you look at the trillions of dollars that are currently committed to, both AI data centers and the energy that it's going to take to power them.
Yep.
I mean, I'm looking, like for the George Jetson, in my lifetime, where I'm just going to be, sitting back and having AI robots doing all sorts of stuff for me.
This is how we bring in new generation nuke, though, Greg, is through powering all these.
Yeah.
This is how
What's
we
that?
get
That is true.
new generation nuclear power is through these AI centers. They're going to pull that.
It's not even new. You know, they're taking the same concept that for 50 years our aircraft carriers and submarines have been powered by small scale nuke. This is just taking that to the next level and putting it on land.
Yeah,
we had a
just hope
question,
the
Ashley.
EPA lets them.
What was the question?
The question was from Mike Wisniewski.
Mike who?
How long will it take for the new tariff trade war to be completed? Will it happen before the end of the year?
You know, I mean, this is obviously a really big question. I'm not in Trump's mind. I don't think it's going to be completed by the end of the year. And one of actually interesting thing, if you look at the actual listed tariff rates, you know, so 50% against India now and whatever they all are, blah, 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 blah. You can get those numbers and you look at it and let's just say it's 20%. We're only collecting, if you compare collected tariffs versus imported, the value of imports, we're collecting like 8%. So it's less than half of the listed tariff, the printed tariff. And there's a
Which is up from 3%.
yeah, it is rising
what
a
it
little
was.
bit, but and nobody can quite figure out why. You know, one of the things is, well, these customs people, they don't know what to charge because it keeps changing every day. And so I do think that gap is going to shrink. So and I think that takes at least all of this year. And and then we bring in Russia into the equation. If we start you know, like it seems to me we're on the verge of of going after anybody that does business with Russia. I mean, Putin is not relenting. I mean, in fact, he just bombed a missile attack on a U.S. factory in Ukraine, which is out in the countryside, which hasn't had a missile near it. They targeted it. So he seems like he's ratcheting things up and trying to pull the US in. And I think one way we do this is we take them off of Swift. You know, we confiscate even more of their global assets, and we start really punishing with tariffs countries that do business with Russia, like India.
One of the challenges is like how much energy still goes from Russia to Europe. I mean, and it's not easily replaced.
Right.
And you're already seeing the effects of like what Ukraine has been targeting both refineries in Russia and their pipelines of late, and that's starting to have an impact there. I mean, I guess I'm going to say if you want to look at the Don Rumsfeld, unknown, it's a massive escalation in the war, because you're right, Brian. He can't quit, because the second he quits, he's done.
Mm-hmm.
The history of Russian history is that, if you lose a war, which is anything other than winning, then you're out of power. And so, the hard challenge, I had this conversation yesterday with somebody. It's like, why don't it cut him off of Swift? Why don't we just like completely cut it off? It's the interconnectedness. And it's also that whole concept is the last thing you want to do is, put a wild dog in a corner where he can't get out.
Yeah.
Because unpredictability of what he might do.
Yeah. And I worry a little bit about, I wish I knew the actual answer. Maybe one of you do. Who owns Swift? I think it's a global consortium of countries, right? And so
who owns Swift?
Yeah.
Swift is proprietary and closed. It is entirely controlled by Apple, and there is no open source implementation.
Yeah, that's somebody else. But
that's why you don't trust that. That's why you don't trust Wikipedia.
Exactly. But But if we go in there and unilaterally exert our will on Swift, imagine like, so the BRICS are already trying to figure out how to use another currency. I mean, India might switch to the yuan or the rupee or the ruble, or, and so we're kind of shooting ourselves a little bit in the foot with by doing that. And so it's a quagmire. But the whole reason I brought that up was tariffs. I still think there's going to be pressure that carries into next year. Trump loves tariffs, clearly. I mean, I thought after Liberation Day and then the reversal that we were kind of done with it. And then they came back with a vengeance. And I think they've decided that they can target these things. They've learned more about them, and they're a better weapon than they were. And so I don't think they stop, and I think it carries on for way more than this
and to
year.
your point is, if we're collecting 8% now, up from 3%, I think I think if we have this conversation a year from now, we might be collecting somewhere between, maybe we're going to be collecting 10 or 12% of imports. And, it's going to settle in somewhere in that range when you factor in, all the things that have 0, all the things that are at 10, 15, and, you really want to get somebody to do something, you say it's a 40% tariff until you change your policy.
How do you take the current environment and turn it into job growth and wage growth? Because that's, to me, the only way that you can make affordability be better, right? Like if you can give the young people of the world a chance to make 100,000 or more a year, then they can maybe bite off a $400,000 house somewhere, But if they're only making $50,000 a year, it's going to be a long time living in mom's basement before they get the $400,000 starter home.
Yep, that's exactly.
We can start by stopping issuing any more student loan debt and indebting people so that the money can get funneled into universities. That would be the best thing we could do for the next generation. Don't give them $1,000 IRA. Stop indebting them. Stop it.
And
absolutely.
And quit firing coaches and paying them $70 million for leaving your university.
Well, having 3 kids in college, I can tell you this for the absolute 100% fact. It's like dealing with used car salesmen trying to figure out what you're going to pay. They have a listed price at Gonzaga of like $70,000 a year.
Yeah,
that's not what I paid. And then they had a listed price at Grand Canyon for Drew, and that's not what I paid. And my daughter's going to go to a medical school here, my other daughter, and they want $70,000 for a 2-year program, but that's not what I'm going to pay. And so it's really strange to me that they have these like high asking prices. It's kind of like Greg going out and offering 2x4 to the Cape at $690 delivered, and then somebody offers him $590. He's like, "Yeah, I'll take it." But the colleges are behaving like commodity brokers. It's really strange.
Right.
It's a good point, Matt.
This is bad Trump on Jeffrey Carter's Substack that he just said we're going to have 600,000 Chinese students.
Oh God!
Let in. They're going to pay the listed price.
Yeah,
and
that was terrible.
I guarantee it. Yeah.
And Brian, Jeff is a good. Like I go back and forth with him. He's about lumber every now and then. He's really really cool, knowledgeable and stuff. We'll have to put his Substack out there.
Yeah, he's a good guy. But that all of this is really it. I mean, Trump's not going to relent on this, and Greg's right. But we have to cut the size of government. I wish we had much lower tax rates. Tariffs are a tax. You cannot ignore that, and so we ought to be cutting other taxes to offset it. Like let's cut the corporate tax rate. Like if you're going to make corporations pay this, well, let's cut their tax rate. All right. And then, but
let's cut our Illinois real estate tax.
How about the federal gas tax?
Federal gas tax, and then regulation. And then let me just make one overarching comment. There was a piece Craig Ip in the Journal wrote the other day. Trump's turning America he's Chinaizing America. I forget the phrase he used, but taking 10% of Intel and 15% of Nvidia sales and all of that. Well, okay, I get the point, and some of these things are, but so was the CHIPS Act. We're behaving like China to compete with China. But at the same time, Trump has cut back regulation on light bulbs, stoves, dishwashers, washing machines, you know, all these things that he's doing to massively cut regulation, you know, canceling the wind farms, like that's the opposite. We're Americanizing that stuff, or whatever the phrase you want to use. I
And
think
the energy
everybody gets
side,
it.
he's
Yeah.
really opened up the energy side too.
So you where it's like, that's why I liked his Jeffries, you know, good Trump, bad Trump, good Trump, bad. So it's not, he's not moving us closer to China. There are things that normal free market America doesn't do, but we are also getting so much better in other areas. So it's not just one analysis. You can't do that with him. He's everywhere. It's kind of interesting.
You know, the one thing I will say is I continually am like impressed by like the level of energy that he has and the capacity to multitask.
Yeah.
I'm like,
Brian.
wow. Just as an FYI, the Swift is owned by the 11,000 member institutions that use it. So it's a cooperative. And Matt, the average college collects 60% of their list price.
Yeah, no, I wasn't kidding, man. It's been an eye opener for me.
Yeah. I mean, you're probably under 50, but you know
Hey, Brian, Matt asked a good question, and maybe we've answered this, but so lumber right now, we've had a long-term, the U.S. and Canada, a dispute back and forth between Canada about subsidies of logs, subsidies of production. I mean, they're set up to be an export economy. 80% of their stuff gets exported. So everybody can agree or disagree, but it seems to me that the main goal of the coalition in the United States is to make the price of lumber higher coming from Canada to increase market share of U.S. lumber, which it's done, as Greg pointed out last week. And now there's a push to actually be more self-sufficient with U.S. lumber, but we don't have the capacity yet. We could have it. So as we grow, what do you think of the manufacturing sector? Do we have the human capital and the ability to grow our manufacturing sector again in the United States? Are we going to be making washing machines over here again? Is Amana, Iowa going to open again and make washing machines? Or is that a hope that it feels good, but it's probably not going to happen?
Yeah. They're going to be made by robots, actually.
Well, I mean, I don't disagree with that in many cases, right?
Yep. I mean, so clearly, I guess the way I would think of this is we got this hierarchy of things. We're not going to be making underwear and socks and T-shirts like that. That is not going to happen again. Probably towels but somewhere up this hierarchy, we will start making stuff. And I don't understand why EPA and Bureau of Land. I mean, in the big beautiful bill, they wanted to sell, gosh, a couple 100 million acres, maybe more. I was looking up this map because I have a place in Colorado, and right across the river from me, that was going to be for sale. I was going to buy it. Like because nobody's going to want it. There's no roads there, but if I can lock it off, then the other side of my river won't. Anyway, but it seems to me that if they're moving in this direction, we will start producing more lumber. But here's can I build a lumber mill? You guys would know this way better than me. Can I build a lumber mill in a year? Like compared to, let's say, aluminum smelter and producer, like, is it faster? Like, which ones of these are we going to build? I think we're going to bring stuff here. I really do. That's Trump's stated goal, and I don't think he's going to relent. And that's why we go back to that question. I don't think he's relenting on tariffs this year. It's not going to be just one and done. He's going to keep doing this because he thinks this is what's going to happen, and it will if we keep the pressure up. The biggest problem I would have spending 500 million to build a big massive lumber mill, a new one, let's say, is what about the next president?
Yeah.
And
so the biggest problem,
this is a 30-year investment.
It takes about
the biggest challenge today is that the current prices of lumber are arguably below break even, and there's no prospect in the next 60, 90, 12 months probably that we're going to be significantly above break even. And so over the next 60, 90 days, we're going to have a steady stream of curtailing the existing production, and that's in the US as well as in Canada. So we're in a situation where we have an oversupplied market today, and people aren't. That's not the time that people make new investments in. To your point, in something that's like got a 20 to 30 year horizon. Although Hampton is building a new mill in South Carolina.
I mean, the single biggest driver of building a sawmill, because it's going to cost between $100 and $200 million to build the sawmill and the planer and all the associated equipment that goes with it, and they're going to have to hire 65 full-time guys and probably another 40 or 50 support staff. You got it. But the biggest driver of that is timber supply. So, and you're not going to build a sawmill and get 10 years worth of timber and then nothing after that. You would never do that, right? You need like a permanent, long-term,
public timber
supply,
or private
timber. It could either be private or public. The reason why the South has been growing so well is because there's just a massive amount of private timber available on a daily basis. And
just to Brian's
and those trees are growing faster. Charles has talked about this. The trees are growing faster than the lumber can be produced. So there's an endless supply of raw material down there. Now in the Northwest, where we operate, most of the timber, when you drive around Oregon, Brian, you see a lot of federal timber, right? And it hasn't been logged in 30, 40 years, really. They do some thinning, but really that's about it. All the private timber is owned by Weyerhaeuser and other log owners, timber owners. So if you wanted to convince Hampton to build a new sawmill in the Northwest, we would have to have assurances like on 30-year scales. I'm not sure that you trust the government through 6 different presidential changes that 30-year agreement would be set in stone. I don't think so. Not with what we just went through the last 30 years. So the idea that we're going to do that here, not going to happen. It might happen in the South.
All right. Because it's private.
Yeah, that's the only. So, other thing would be, Brian, if they passed the big beautiful bill that had those things in it where they're going to sell public land off to Weyerhaeuser or Hampton or Brian Westbury, and then you can determine your own fate by just owning the timberland and managing it. Yeah, that's one way around it. But I don't hear anyone talking about that, and I doubt that's going to happen.
It got kicked out of the bill. Yeah.
Matt was just asking, you saw the most profitable market for Euro lumber is now the U.S., even with the 15% tariff. Another wave of unsold lumber to deal with this fall. Do you guys have any updates on mill closures?
I don't see where there's a 15% tariff on Euro lumber.
They're allowed to. They haven't determined it yet, but it's been determined that they could tax it up to 15%.
I think this is why we have that difference between listed and actual.
Right. Well, right now it's 0. Right.
Yeah.
So there is more Euro coming, and I know that there is no scuttlebutt in my world yet on mill closures, but I have to believe that at the prices the Canadian spruce mills are having to take today, if this continues for much longer, there's going to be some significant closures. I mean, it just, with all the 35% average ADD and CVD that we're putting on it right now, that number FOB mill is like sub 300, and their cost of production is more like 450 to 500. So if you're going to lose $15,000 to $20,000 per choo-choo train, and you're shipping 50 to 100 cars a day, you don't have to be a math wizard to do that kind of math. It's pretty penalizing.
I think that people should spend less time looking at what happens in Canada and more time looking at what happens in the U.S. South. Lumber prices aren't going to bottom until you see curtailment in the U.S. South. Their current prices look to me, and we don't have Charles on today to give us the back of the envelope, but that looks like they're basically mill net is timber cost. And I think that's and they're representing close to 40+% of total North American production right now.
Yeah,
Yeah, negative cash flow is going to hurt you, right?
Yeah,
It's one, you can run your sawmill at a break even or a slight loss for a while, but when you start just pumping cash out to, the bank starts going, hey, your assets don't match your input here. We're going to have to sell off some assets to change your balance sheet.
Hey, just
And
real
that's when
quick
you see closures.
to Matt Lehman too. I want to thank Matt because he's a new advertiser on the podcast. So you'll hear his new ad that I did tomorrow.
Yeah, Ash, you sound like a legit radio personality on that. I mean, I was really impressed. And you didn't do it with AI. When do we get our AI guest on?
It's still working. We got the AI rap song to introduce the show. So I mean, I use AI for everything now.
Hey, Brian, you know what, man? Thank you so
Yeah.
much for being available today. I know how busy your schedule is, and this was like, I mean, this is why I love this podcast, the kind of the discussion that we have and the sharing. I mean, I thank you so much.
Thanks,
I look
Greg.
forward to seeing you in a couple
Yeah.
weeks too, my friend.
Absolutely.
We'll enjoy a cigar.
Hey, Brian,
together.
if you're serious about the lunch invite, how do I get the details from you?
Yeah. Hey, Matt, we're at the Ritz today. Just
I can get his number to you.
get my number from Ashley and come.
Okay.
Lunch is at 11:30.
Okay.
All right.
Thank you.
There you go. Hey, Matt, you should go because the presentation that they do.
Yeah,
is
I'm going
awesome.
to go. I just
They do a
because I
great
want to
job.
meet Brian.
That's awesome.
He's
Yeah.
kind of awestruck, and I'm going to act like a fanboy.
Act like you've been in the end zone before.
You know what? He gets enough of that. You don't need to do that, man.
I'm kidding.
All right, guys.
Yeah. All right.
All right, awesome,
Thank you.
guys. Thank you.
Thanks for having me.
Bye.
Bye.
Bye.